Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being there. It's always nice to see old friends and new friends. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce this year's demonstrators. We have here on my side Tony Tickle. Tony? Then we have a special guest, Minoru Akiyama. It's his first time at the trophy. It's absolutely not the first time in Europe, because I've seen working already before, and he's very good. Seeing he speaks Japanese, Peter Warren will do the translation for him, and will even assist him if necessary. Then we have someone else you know, Mauro Stemberg from Italy. And then our good friend, Ryan Neal.
This has been in a tree that was imported, I believe, by Bonsai Plaza. And this type of material has been put into a pot, allowed to grow out quite wild, and then has been cut back once in order to develop internal branching. So this section here had been kind of like maybe the focal point. But his vision for the tree is to really make a feature point of the hollow section that we see, where the trunk's kind of like rotted away a little bit on this side.
Hello guys. So I want to first thank the organization for having me here. It's a pleasure and an honor, and it's also an honor to be here with other great demonstrators. I'm going to work today this big Scots pine with my student Christopher from Puerto Rico and my student Akim from Germany, that they are going to help me. I collected this tree 4 years ago in France. Pretty interesting material with a lot of character, as you can see. We just finished cleaning a little bit of the old needles to have, some way for the wiring. The tree has a lot of character, some interesting feature, some very interesting knees, big bending on the trunks. Last year in spring, I potted the tree in this first bonsai container, removing almost all the original soil, and put the tree in pumice and akadama. The tree is strong. On my Yamadori, I always wait 2, 3, 4 years until they start showing a lot of strength in the buds. So as you can see here, we have 3 buds. That's the sign that the tree is ready. So it's ready to be styled and set the first bones for the future bonsai. I was always debating myself about the front of the tree. Originally, I was looking the tree from this side. The base is a little bit weak, but have this interesting central part of the tree with a nice twisty gene, this top gene. This part of the branch is a little bit boring, but I have eventually these branches that I can use to cover this section.
All right. What's going on, everybody? Yay. Back at the Trophy 2020. The biggest question that I've gotten this weekend is, did the tree from last year survive? Right? And hopefully you've all seen it, because I think Danny posted pictures of it. But if you haven't seen it, I posted a picture on my Instagram story just now, so you can see it. It's alive, healthy, thriving, right? So that should answer some questions. My least desire is to try and do something like that again, right? Because it wasn't like, let's put on a great show. It was kind of what had to happen for that tree to be able to be styled in that fashion and then continually be cared for to thrive after that styling. And in any demonstration, if the tree doesn't thrive afterwards, if the tree doesn't carry on and continue its journey as a bonsai, then it's not really that great of a demonstration. So we're always trying to think, how do we create the best image that we possibly can sustainably to set that structure soundly and continue that tree moving forward. So when you see this and you see the deadwood here, you understand some of the limitations or potential things that we might think of as limitations in the root system. We see this gin and we get that gin and all of its beautiful lines. We understand why this tree was placed in this position.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be here. First of all, I want to say thank you to the organization for putting on an amazing show. Can we have a round of applause for them? Because I think it was, the work that's gone into this has been phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. This is Sergio Luciani from Argentina. He's going to be my attractive assistant. Have a round of applause for him. He normally wears a nice sequin number, but today he's just wearing a t-shirt. Okay, it's heavy, yeah. This is a 35 kilo stone, okay? So the challenge is going to be, of course, planting it in this stone is always going to be a challenge, okay? And of course the challenge yeah, it's a heavy stone, okay? So keep going, there we go, okay.
You can see from the bark of the tree how the tendency of this tree is twisty. What's happened is that, and also the reason why some of these Scots pine grow in this way, is that they grow on the hillside and is a very shallow layer of good soil where they can grow, because underneath there is rock and the roots are not able to go down, so they can't send a tap root down to be able to stand. So they basically snake down the hill, but also the soil along the centuries is sliding, so the trees slide down the hill and rotate. So that's the reason every time the tree tries to get his way to reset all the foliage up to reface the sunlight.
So the first bit of work that Mr. Akiyama's done is to, oh sorry, standing on your tools there, is to remove some of the branches, the heavy branches down here, to sort of begin to set the primary branch structure here. But then also look at working on the deadwood area here, removing, just make sure he's not going to cut my finger off, removing some of the heaviness from that section there to remove that kind of feeling of inverse taper that we had up there. And one of the things that Mr. Akiyama was discussing whilst sort of doing this work here, some of the areas where water had been collecting and sitting on the wood had rotten away very, very easily and quickly, and were very easy to remove.
Okay, so kind of work this little piece here just because it had been stump cut. So basically what I was saying initially is that we understand that we have that two-dimensionally straight line, and one of the things about bonsai design is our eyes can really trick us, because we know that there's something there three-dimensionally. And this has some proximity and similarity to the juniper we did last year as well. It's like there's something more in this tree than the cascading form of that juniper last year. There's something more in this juniper than that straight two-dimensional line. If I eliminate my bias, my brain knows there's something there three-dimensionally, but two-dimensionally you can't see it. And this is oftentimes, and I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but you style a tree, you take a picture of it, and then you're like, oh, what happened? It looks so good. And I take a picture of it, and it doesn't look that good. And then you say, well, some trees are better viewed in person than in picture, right? But actually, this is where you start to say the camera is sharper than your eye, because the camera doesn't know that there's three dimensions there. It's not fooling anybody by talking itself out of the fact that you haven't taken advantage of the very best line possible. So if we know that that's a possibility, we can start to search and pull that line out where we're not utilizing our concept of three dimensions intellectually to place that character into the tree. And so when we come up at this angle, what we start to see up in the canopy of this is just this magnificent amount of movement that you could not see from the original position. Okay, there's another concept here. And I'll kind of let these guys get stabilized. I'll rotate it and show you some of these pieces. But the other thing about this is a tremendous amount of weight, physically and visually out here, hanging way off of the container, which I love. Asymmetry is a big demonstration of age. But this base is not so powerful, right? It's kind of lacking something. And sometimes we would say, oh, well, junipers don't really have a good base when they come out of collection, so you just kind of have to deal with it. And I would say, this is the same thing as saying a tree sometimes looks better in person than in a photograph, okay? Because we know that no matter what we do, this is going to be a very weak base. Now, the original front was chosen to show this piece of deadwood. Show it off, this is the heart of the tree, but you can't have a piece of deadwood compensate for a weak base and a straight line in the trunk if you have more character to pull out of that tree, okay? So instead of leaning on that and sort of accepting all of these things that we could talk ourselves into for a lesser design, we said, how do you make the base stronger? Well, what if this piece of deadwood starts to contribute to the base? What if we start to conceptualize in this angle, the bottom of this deadwood actually potentially engaging with the surface of the soil? And we start to say, wow, we could pull the container all the way over here. This piece can hang outside of the container. The edge of the container can exist somewhere over in here. And all of a sudden, our base grows by the width of this piece plus this piece. And now we have stability that can hold all of this asymmetry. And if we tilt this up, now all of a sudden, that two-dimensional line, if we're not talking ourselves out of it, is turned into this three-dimensional line that shows every piece of movement, foreground, middle ground, background, left, right, twisting, rotating. We get that contrast of live and dead, and all of a sudden we start to see this tree come to life.
The reason for putting it in this particular angle is to take the best advantage of the natural movement in this tree. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pull all of this up here. We're going to use a tourniquet from here to this point to lift all of this up. So it's not too long a tree. It's great. We have a good back branch here. We have another good back branch here, and enough foliage. This is not going to be a heavy tree. This is a very delicate, feminine tree. We don't want a huge amount of foliage, which will give that visual weight. We don't want that. It's going to be very, very delicate. So this is another reason for choosing this as the front and not this, because, to be honest, this is not particularly attractive. Endeavoring not to hide this too much by going to be placing this around here. So it's going to have a tight amount of foliage, and should look cool.
So on the first styling on a Scots pine, especially when we have all these twisty branches, we have to be very careful on reopening eventually those bands in the opposite direction, because the fiber of the wood tend to open and is a big stress for the tree. That's the reason why I wanted to protect this section with raffia, because as you can see, the branch was growing in that direction, so I need to bring the branch over here to create the depth of my tree and a little bit of green coming in this side. So now that I'm gonna wire this section with the structural wire, I need to think about the direction I wanna move and fix the branch. This wire will be not the wire making the bend, but will be the wire holding the fiber together while I'm doing the bend. So because the branch is coming in this direction, I need to wire clockwise. So while I wire, the wire tied it down to the branch and all the fiber of the wood.
And he said at the start of the demonstration, there's a lot of branches on this tree, but a lot of them are all coming from the same place. And a lot of them are very sort of long, elongated and leggy, without many sort of secondary branches coming off of them. And so the decision-making process, as he's going through and looking at removing branches coming from multiple positions, is to kind of look at the thickness and the heaviness of the branch, to see how, as you can just see then, ちょっと回していい？で、なんかそっち側からやってってこっちから。And just sort of feeling the thickness of the branch, seeing how well they can be bent, and also looking at the amount of secondary branches or adventitious buds growing from the sort of the base of the branch, as to which of the neighbouring branches, all the branches coming from similar positions, which of those is the better to use. Looking how far he can sort of confidently kind of like cut back the branches and still maintain a decent amount of foliage on the tree to power the roots.
I'm just going to rotate it once because I don't think I've done that for you guys yet, but give you an idea of the movement that I was seeing. As you start to see from this side, you start to recognize how much this has in it. And it is very, very special in terms of the movement that it has in it. And you can even see through the structure the kind of movement that starts to happen. And you notice that this big transition up here, where you're moving through the living tissue and you start to get into these bigger folds. Now, in the original front, when I come back here, this was our apex that was sitting on top of the tree. But when you start to turn this into the apex, the continuation of the line base to tip, defining the trunk line, right? Because this could be the trunk line, but if this is the continued trunk line showing this better position that shows all of this nuance to the line and increases the strength of the base, we would have to lose this piece above it. Okay, because you can't have something up here and bring it down as a branch and then have your apex. It kind of creates a nightmare over the long run of that tree. So if that's the case, this has to turn into a branch. Now here's the problem with this branch. This branch is right in front of this piece of deadwood that originally led to the initial selection of the front. And although we said, hey, listen, this tree isn't just a piece of deadwood, it's got a great base, it's got incredible movement, we're going to maximize those pieces. This gin's pretty awesome, still pretty awesome, okay? So I don't want to cover that up, but I need to turn this in terms of the priority and the definition of the line base to now my new tip, this being our apical region. I need to go ahead and decrease the priority of this so that I can use it in the design, orient it around this deadwood, but not hide the deadwood with it, right? And untying everything, as much as I don't super know how I feel about this. Okay, untying everything and just simplifying this a little bit. No. We're going to go there, okay? Now what this does is this opens up more of the quality of the line.
And we've been collecting these stones for about 10 years now, and we've been planting a lot of trees on these stones. So this one's been prepared, ready for this demonstration. If you want to make a note, it's called Devonian schist, and it comes from a place in Athol. You have to be very careful how you say schist and Athol together. It's millions of years old, millions and millions and millions of years. It's actually volcanic. And when we collect it in the mountains, it's all folded. And what we do is, if there are any geologists out there, this is called the cleavage. We can actually cut this away and make three pots out of this one. But we chose to keep this one because visually the thickness of this here matches the thickness of the trunk here.
So we are in the middle of wiring, and the guys are busy fine wiring. As you can see, I did all the structural wire because obviously I know a little bit the direction. I'm gonna bend the branches.
I'm really not a fan of just the triangle. The triangle for me is fine, but I like to see particular structure in a tree, and you can see what's happening here. The challenge for me is to get the top nicely. It's a little longer than I would have liked, but I quite like this lower branch here. We have a really nice back branch here, and this will. I don't want it to be too visually too heavy in the foliage.
So when you start to apply a major amount of torque to a branch that has dead and live interacting, as long as you're applying rotational torque, then what you end up doing is you take that tissue and you open it like a book. And a tree can tolerate that, particularly a juniper because it's moving resources linearly. You can open that, you can have it just kind of, page 10, boom. And the tree's not going to suffer at all with that kind of action. So I wanted to go in terms of this movement until I heard it split. Did you guys hear it all pop? Okay. That's not a pop like a branch breaking in half. That's a different sound. That's an oh shit sound. Okay. That pop was yeah, okay, we're still good sound. But it was we're still good sound, and it's also I'm gonna be able to heel and hold this position sound. Because if you have deadwood, trying to get deadwood to bend and hold that spot is nearly impossible. I mean, this is unfathomable strength and a tremendous amount of growth. But if you decrease that deadwood's holding capacity, the tree doesn't have to add that much tissue to hold that position. So I wanted to push it until I inflicted that kind of, right, page 10, page 15, bop, open it up a little bit, and that's what's going to allow this branch to stay here. Now, once I did that, you can see that this branch is coming across this piece right here, and I'm not a huge fan of that because we want to show that piece as much as we can. But we also see that this branch right here is going to be right at a point where we can close a little bit of this negative space, and in particular in this negative space is the fact that this piece of the trunk is arching this way, this piece of the trunk is arching this way, and it creates almost a circular region that we don't want to be looking at a circle because our eye will just continue to go there in terms of the design. So we're going to move this branch over into this area. I'm assuming we're going to drop this one off, but that means now that this has to play a very major priority. Now this is also loaded with deadwood. So in order to get this branch to a position that I need, I've got to roll it over clockwise as well against that deadwood, which I'm hopefully going to get it to open to page 10. And then we can pull this piece here. Once that's successful, we'll take this piece off here, and we'll have all of our structure in place in terms of our primary branches to define that movement and asymmetry, right? It's kind of a lot of effort, but worth it.
And so is making this the kind of like the character branch, the character sort of feature branch of the tree, looking at bringing it out as much as possible. So because it's that first styling, that rough styling, the initial sort of setting the structure of the bones of the tree, most of the branches become sort of very flat. So opening the structure out rather than having lots and lots of volume initially. And so one of the first things that we said about at the start of the demonstration is about creating character and finding those points, those character points in the tree to show off. This is a natural sort of character feature that's being accentuated. And one of the things that Mr. Akiyama said was he wanted to open this up so that it can be seen. And so if we open that up too much, and we create a block of foliage just up at the top here, and then this block of foliage is quite low down here, then there's going to be a big gap in between those two. Okay, it's going to look very sort of strange and unnatural, not like a mature tree. And so in order to kind of fuse or to make those two sort of areas a little bit closer, is to bringing this branch up, creating this as a sort of as I said, that sort of secondary apex on that branch, in order to help sort of bridge that gap.
I want to take a minute just to explain what's my process when I collect these big trees. So generally, where I collect Scots pine, they tend to have a pretty small and compact root ball. Sometimes they have a couple of wrong runners, but actually it's because, as I said, that the trees on these deeper slopes, they tend to slide down the hill. So they tend to have a very long roots from the original place where they start growing, and then the roots extend down when the tree arrives. It's kind of crazy. So it's not actually the roots growing up the hill, but that was the original place where the tree was growing, and then the tree was sliding down. So for example, these roots was very, very long, far away, and the tree has a very nice and compact root ball. So probably all the fine roots were holding kind of the soil on the way down the hill when the tree was sliding. And as I said, that's the reason why all this twisting. Most of the time, we are lucky enough to find compact trees where we find a lot of branches on top of the trunk because the tree tend to keep a lot of vegetation on top of the root ball because that place in south of France is very, very hot and dry in summer. So thanks to the foliage, it can get some shade on top of the root ball, so it can kind of protect the root ball from dehydration because, as I said, they really live in a very shallow soil. And after I get back them home, obviously I have to deal with this very nasty clay where they grow that is totally unhelpful for the bonsai, work. But if I remove totally that soil when I collect the tree, I kill the tree. Scots pine grows in symbiosis with mycorrhiza, and it's very important, especially when I collect a tree and it has just few fine roots, to keep that mycorrhiza connected to those roots and give a chance to the tree to produce new roots in the new soil. So I plant the tree, clean a little bit that original soil. Most of all, I clean the outside part, getting some of the roots clean, but the main inside part is still in clay. I keep the tree as dry as possible because if I treat my Amadori that is in clay like a normal bonsai tree in a good soil and water maybe every day, I'm gonna kill the tree because no air will be inside of the clay, and the roots will start suffering for lack of oxygen and they will start dying, and that process will start producing fungi disease, not good fungi like mycorrhiza, but bad fungi disease, and also the roots start rotting and dying, and you risk to lose a tree. So I grow the tree for the 2-3 years, the first 2-3 years in pure pomace, big size, to have a lot of air, and also dry out as fast as possible the original root ball. I get the tree as strong as possible, giving a lot of nitrogen. As soon as I see that the tree start producing the tree buds on the strong top, that's the sign I can start removing most of the clay and get the tree in the next container and in a better soil. So at least I repot the tree once and remove maybe 70-80% or sometimes also 100% of the original soil according to the amount of roots that the tree produced in the new soil. So according to that balance, I remove more or less clay. And then I wait again. Sometimes in a year, in a growing season, the tree is already strong again because it's going to get drier. It's going to reduce the needle, but still have very big buds that are showing strength. And then I can start manipulating the structure and working the tree. But I never work a Scots pine or in general a pine, especially, that has still the original soil. This is the same for Mugo pine, and it is even slower because Mugo is a little bit weaker and slower in recovering than Scots pine. So I do the same process with Mugo pine because they also have a lot of these in mugo pine, they grow in their own needles on top of the rock most of the time. So this dirt is also very bad for holding moisture.
Man, pretty dramatic repositioning of the branches, and I'm happy with where it's headed. It's been a journey with this tree. Now, one of the things that happens when you come back and you touch a tree that's been worked really significantly or potentially multiple times is you have to be hyper aware of every single point where maybe damage was done at some point, where maybe a split happened, a tear happened, a break happened, a piece of deadwood now is interacting or relating to the living vein. And across these branches, there's like every single one of those situations happening multiple times on each of them, so had to be very careful. You probably noticed me looking at this branch really, really closely. We did get this branch to open like a book, right, that page 10 thing that we were talking about right here, boom, live vein separated from the deadwood. This means it'll hold that position more rapidly. We got that rotation, we got this pushed here. This is now going to give us that defining branch. Everything that we had planned happened, and that's exactly sort of when we go through a piece of work like this and you start to set this scope of work for yourself, you have to have really definitive ideas about what you're trying to accomplish. Now, you have to be malleable. You've got to be flexible because the tree is going to do some things you think it's going to do. It's going to do a lot of things you didn't know it was going to do. And how do you adapt and adjust to all of that? That's really the proficiency of a bonsai practitioner, is how do you adapt and kind of roll, because you can't make a tree do what you want it to do. You just kind of have to say, what about, oh, nope, I guess we're not, okay, we can, that looks good, right? Like, it's one of those conversations. It's a feeling out process in terms of the relationship with the tree. But by getting this piece, which originally was covering all of this, pushed over to the left side of the tree, now you get that line. And that's really what we wanted, that line right there. We went ahead and opened this up so we preserved that gin and that visibility of that very significant feature. We were able to drop the back down to occupy some of this space because we took what was in this space and we pushed it over to the left side via this branch. And again, every single one of these, at the point where it attaches to the living tissue, wanted to tear. So we had to just be very, very careful as we went through that process, kind of watching how far we pushed, trying to get what we wanted, maybe transitioning that distribution of bend and flex and stretch across multiple pieces of tissue. So now coming back to the apical region, again, this was the old apex of the tree. So when we come back to this piece, this used to be the back branch on the tree, and now we're turning it into an apex. So taking these pieces that, again, were oriented this way, distributing them so we start to create that 3D, that three-dimensional apical region to the tree, that's important, and that's kind of the challenge here, because these branches, again, want to tear, and they want to split, and they want to break. So we just have to go very, very slow in this process and watch all of those pieces. But from this point forward now, moving into the detail wiring, and again, this is very similar to the tree that I did last year. We're going to set that stylistic tone here with this asymmetrical piece, because this is the branch that's going to guide the style of every other point that we touch on this tree. So we'll go ahead and make sure this is going to take the most time, because we've got to tease out all of that style and nuance to the tree, and that's going to guide every other branch. Those pads are going to reference this length and size, and we're going to work through the tree now on the detailed level. But ultimately, just the process to get this small piece down so we can see some of this trunk, and to open that piece up by using the rebar as a point to apply that pressure to, getting the rebar to not rotate on the live vein and hold its position inside of the tree. Quite an involved piece of work for what seems like a relatively small, kind of seems like a simple juniper, but ultimately it's turned into a very complex piece of work, and you can expect that with Sabinas. They do challenge and push your level, right? Okay, so the question was, when I'm pushing a branch and I'm trying to max out its capacity to move where I want it to move, would I ever encourage it with a saw cut? Now, this is where we start to divide our techniques, because with a pine, yes, absolutely. Okay, but pines can move resources laterally as well as vertically. And so when you start to say a saw cut, maybe you sever or start to insert the saw underneath a branch on a pine to create that space to be able to lower that branch, okay? Excuse me. But when you start to talk about a juniper, junipers move resources, particularly when they get old, like this tree. And we know this tree is old because when we break into some of the older gins, the core is very red, filled with resin. That resin-filled core is what is giving us that understanding that the resources can only move vertically because now they cannot move laterally through the center of that branch. And when we look at the trunk being specifically linear in terms of its transport, that's what creates the living vein in the deadwood that we come to know as the aesthetic of junipers. So from this, I would never want to ease that tension, right? Instead, I want to apply the force on a rotational kind of application to get that tissue that's moving linearly to open like this and release some of that tension. And that's what we were doing when we rotated this big branch and got it to open like a book. It's what happened here when we wanted that rotation and we got it to open and separate from the deadwood. And so that has to be very calculated because you can go too far. That force of that bend can be displaced across a point on the tissue that you didn't plan for and you lose control of that bend. So it all has to be calculated. The reason that I moved to the rebar here as a point of leverage wasn't because I couldn't bend it with my hand. It was because I didn't have calculated force. So by transitioning to that rebar, I can use my body and I can go very, very slowly with a very calculated amount of force, and right when it kind of popped and opened where I wanted it to be, I could stop. Whereas with your hand, if you're pushing and you're really trying to apply force, you don't have control. If it goes, oftentimes you go with it, right? And that's when you start to tear branches off. So the rebar, you know, it's showy to put rebar on a tree, but ultimately it's functional from having that utter control. You extend the length of your lever arm, you have that a capacity to apply more force with less effort, and that gives you the control that you're looking for.
So, I already put the two anchor for the structural bending. I anchor this elbow behind this one with a screw so we can push it in. And then I anchor this branch up to the main tangent. You can see that the trunk move up and has kind of a, a very close twister that fuse together in this section of the trunk. So my goal will be coming with a branch from the back and kind of frame that section. That will be my left part of the triangle. And while I'm doing that, pushing everything together, I still have that lower branch that has also a nice twist that I will try to bend it in and create the first branch of the tree. So as soon as the guy finish, couple of more wire, we start doing the structural movement and then the final setting on the branches.
So what we've done, as you can see, we built it up. I don't know if you saw, but there was actually quite a very narrow inverse taper on the trunk there. So it was important that we hit that by building this up. Okay, but if you remember earlier, we said the problem was, the challenge was how do you present a tree like this? What do you put it on a table? What do you do? Do you create something? What do you do? But we have created something. So we're going to bring it out. Sergio, we're going to bring it. So this is how you present a tree like this. Take it off. So. Do you want to do the corner?
So there's a question about wiring. I guess the question was, looks like I'm wiring every branch, which I'm actually not wiring every branch. I'm not super into overly trying to wire a tree, but you do have to, particularly when you change orientation and change all of the positions of the structural branches. You have to come back and you have to wire these pieces out, because what's going to happen is after you change all of those positions and your branches are sitting like this, which you can see, that's the position of this. You've got some up high, you've got some down low. You're going to start to have the attrition or the loss of the lower branches. The upper branches are going to start to grow super strong and long and get really, really thick, and you're going to have this lopsided distribution of energy. Now, this is a tree that has already been styled and been a bonsai for some time now. So when we change that, to bring those back into that orientation where all of those branches have the equivalent exposure to sun, have the equivalent accumulation of hormones over the course of their growth, that's what allows us to get even distribution across the pad. And when we redesign a tree, we need to reset that branch shape so that we can control the width or the narrowness, the thickness of that pad, and that orientation in terms of length of that pad. So these are all just points that when we do this kind of work, and the discussion of it needs to accumulate, why would we have to wire like this if you need to accumulate more density? It looks like we need to accumulate more density because we're giving those branches the space to be able to grow. And if we know anything about the way Sabina grows, at least the really tight, compact foliar forms of Sabina, they clump first. So they amass, and you can see here, they amass these really, really dense tips. And once that dense tip starts to amass a lot of that foliar capacity to generate sugars and starches, then it starts to elongate, only after it gains density. So this is very counter to the way North American junipers grow, where they will run first, and then they'll amass density second. This is very close in terms of growth habit to the way a shimpaku works in terms of sabinas, where it amasses that density first and then it runs. So by spreading out that density and giving it space, this tree is going to recover very, very quickly. It's going to be able to continue moving forward without skipping a beat, and I'm going to even out that distribution of energy across those branches by redefining those pads and controlling that design aspect. And when we think design, whenever you're thinking design in terms of bonsai, you have to be thinking function and aesthetics. Okay, and the functional aspect of design is, does this photosynthetic system have the ability to generate the sugars and starches that not just sustain the life of the tree, but allow it to continue to expand? Because every plant has to be moving forward, or else it's moving backwards, right? You have to be growing or you're dying as a plant. So we can't think about this as trying to hold it here. We can't think about it as we're not going to do anything after doing all of this severe work, and that's going to be better for the tree. It actually would be worse for the tree. Now, if our wiring technique is off, if it's too rough, it's too aggressive on these finer branches, that's where we see a tree suffer. But that's why we work so hard technically to be able to accumulate the skills to do this kind of structural work where we know the big heavy work and the adjustments have established the bones of the tree. And then we work on those finer techniques to be able to deliver that wire, organize that, create that photosynthetically functional system, and have the plant thrive. So that's what we're working on now.